The air inside the federal courtroom felt heavy, almost suffocating, as though everyone's breath had been stolen and locked away with the secrets about to unfold. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but it didn't matter. Millions of eyes were fixed on this very room. Reporters sat ready, pens trembling between their fingers. Families shifted uneasily in their seats, clutching tissues, waiting for the moment they'd been dreaming about or dreading for months. At the defense table, Sean Diddy Combs sat frozen, dressed in a tailored dark suit. Yet his face told a different story. His eyes were red, sleepless, haunted by the weight of what was about to happen. He rubbed his thumb over his bracelet unconsciously, as though clinging to the last tangible piece of the life he once controlled. Every so often, his lawyer leaned in, whispering reassurance. But Diddy's expression stayed blank, like he was hearing nothing at all. The murmurs around the courtroom were low, tense, and full of speculation. Some whispered about the length of the sentence. Others wondered if his influence would still save him. The gallery was filled with divided faces, victims, families gripping photos, Diddy's supporters praying silently, and media correspondents silently calculating their breaking headlines. Suddenly, the courtroom doors opened, and Judge Arun Subramanian stepped inside. A hush swept across the room instantly, every sound swallowed in an instant. His black robe trailed behind him as he walked to the bench, his expression unreadable, his presence commanding respect without a single word. Even the security marshal straightened as he took his seat. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable video, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon. That way, you'll never miss any new coming videos like this. Now, let's get back to it. Diddy slowly lifted his head, his gaze locking on the judge for the briefest moment before darting back down to the polished wood of the defense table. You could see his chest rising and falling faster now, his composure cracking at the edges. Behind him, his mother sat between his children, her trembling hands gripping a tissue so tightly it tore between her fingers. Every camera outside the courthouse, every microphone waiting on the steps, every trending topic online, they were all anticipating what would be said in this room today. But inside, there was only silence, thick and unbearable, stretching like a rope about to snap. Judge Subramanian opened a file slowly, flipping through several pages before setting it down carefully on the bench. The sound of the paper hitting wood felt louder than thunder in the frozen courtroom. He didn't speak yet, but his measured breathing carried power, and every second of hesitation made the tension climb higher. Diddy leaned back slightly, closing his eyes as though bracing himself against an invisible storm. For a man who had built an empire, this single moment had stripped everything away. Fame, money, power, none of it mattered anymore. Only the next words from the bench would define the rest of his life. And still, the room waited. The prosecutor rose from his chair slowly, deliberately, as if every step carried the weight of the truth the world had been waiting to hear. His black suit looked sharp, but his expression was sharper, cold, unflinching, and laced with a quiet fury that made the room fall even quieter. He walked to the center of the courtroom, his shoes clicking against the polished wooden floor, each sound echoing like a drumbeat of judgment. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady but powerful, slicing through the silence like a blade. "Today isn't just another day in court. Today isn't about fame. It isn't about wealth. Today is about accountability." He turned slowly, letting his gaze sweep across the room, from the jury box to the gallery, and finally stopping on Diddy. For years, Sean Combs has lived as though the rules didn't apply to him. Power, influence, money. He believed these things would shield him forever. He stepped closer to the defense table, his voice rising. But no man, no matter how famous, no matter how powerful, is above the law. Gasped, whispered through the gallery. Victims' families clutched their seats, their eyes locked on him as he paced deliberately. This isn't about one mistake, the prosecutor continued, his tone sharpening with every word. This is about a pattern, a trail of choices, each one darker than the last. Choices that destroyed lives, left families shattered, and victims silenced for far too long. He gestured toward the front row, where two women sat, their faces pale, tears staining their cheeks. They deserve justice, he said, his voice breaking slightly, but steadying again. Every single one of them deserves a system that doesn't bend just because someone in this courtroom once stood on a stage and called himself untouchable. Diddy sat motionless, but his clenched jaw and the twitch in his fingers gave him away. His lawyer whispered something under his breath, urging him to stay calm, but Diddy didn't look away from the prosecutor. His stare was locked, silent, almost defiant. But beneath it all, the fear was unmistakable. The prosecutor flipped through his notes quickly, pulling out a single page, holding it high for emphasis. This evidence, he said firmly, isn't opinion. It isn't gossip. It's fact. And the facts tell us that Sean Combs thought his fame bought him freedom, but that illusion ends today. Reporters scribbled furiously, pens scratched against paper. A camera clicked faintly somewhere outside, catching the vibrations of a world watching history unfold. And so, he said, lowering his voice to a chilling calm, we are asking for the maximum sentence allowable by law, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Because anything less would say to every victim, every family, and every person watching that power still decides justice. And in this courtroom, Your Honor, that cannot happen. The final words lingered in the air like smoke, heavy and unshakable. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst could have been. Diddy's breathing slowed, his face pale under the harsh lights. The gallery sat frozen, some leaning forward unconsciously, others gripping their seats so tightly their knuckles turned white. Everyone knew this wasn't just an argument. This was the blow that could seal Diddy's fate. Diddy's lead attorney, Marcus Hill, rose slowly, his movements deliberate, as if he was carrying the full weight of his client's life on his shoulders. The air in the courtroom was still thick, charged with tension after the prosecutor's thunderous words. Every eye turned toward him, searching his face for strength, for hope, for some kind of lifeline that could save Diddy Combs from the storm closing in. Marcus adjusted his tie, steadied his breathing, and walked to the center of the courtroom. He placed both hands on the podium, pausing for a long moment before speaking, letting the silence pull everyone closer. Your Honor, he began softly, his voice calm but firm, carrying a sincerity that made the entire gallery lean in. The prosecution wants you to believe that Sean Combs is nothing but his mistakes. They want to erase everything he has built, every life he has touched, every opportunity he has created, and reduce him to a single narrative, unredeemable. But that is not the man sitting before you today. He turned briefly toward Diddy, who sat motionless, his head bowed, his trembling hands clasped tightly on the table. Marcus' voice grew steadier, rising with quiet conviction. Sean Combs is a father, a son, a man who spent decades uplifting others, building careers, funding schools, creating hope where there was none. Does that erase the wrongs? No. But, Your Honor, justice isn't about erasing a person. It's about balance. He glanced at the victims' families, his voice softening, carrying a weight that reached every corner of the room. To those who've suffered, he said gently, Sean Combs hears you. He understands the pain. He knows he can't undo the past, and he carries that burden every single day. But I stand here to ask, does a life defined by mistakes deserve no chance at redemption? The gallery shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, others stared coldly, but Marcus pressed on. his words flowing with a raw urgency. Now, this is not a man beyond saving. This is a man standing on the edge of his own humanity, stripped of power, stripped of privilege, stripped of everything, but the hope that he can still do better. He stepped closer to the bench, locking eyes with Judge Subramanian. Prison, Your Honor, will punish. But will it heal? Will it mend what has been broken? Or can we choose a path that demands accountability and gives a chance for restoration? We are not asking for freedom without consequence. We are asking for mercy without abandoning justice. Behind Marcus, Diddy's mother quietly wept, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in a tissue. Her children sat frozen, their small hands clinging tightly to one another as though they understood more than anyone realized. Marcus's voice dropped low, almost a whisper now. Your Honor, Sean Combs has fallen. He has lost everything he thought made him untouchable. Fame is gone. Power is gone. What remains is a man who finally understands that he is just like everyone else, flawed, fragile, and accountable. He took one last deep breath, his words slow and deliberate. Please, I give him a chance to rise again. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus returned to his seat, his shoulders heavy, his eyes downcast, his last plea hanging in the air like smoke. Diddy didn't move. He didn't speak. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. He simply stared ahead, trapped between the echoes of his past and the weight of his future. Judge Arun Subramanian sat in complete stillness, his hands folded neatly on the bench, his gaze locked on the stack of files before him. The silence in the courtroom was so deep it felt alive, heavy, suffocating, pressing against every chest in the room. Even the reporters, who live for chaos, sat frozen, their pens hovering above their pads, waiting for the moment that would decide everything. He adjusted his glasses slowly, almost deliberately, and finally lifted his head, his sharp gaze sweeping over the packed courtroom. His eyes lingered briefly on the victims' families in the front row, their tear-streaked faces silently pleading for justice. Then, without warning, his focus shifted to Diddy, who sat at the defense table, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly together, his breath shallow and uneven. Mr. Combs, the judge began, his deep voice cutting through the silence like a blade, you stand before this court today not as a celebrity, not as an icon, but as a man accountable for his actions. Diddy raised his head slightly, his bloodshot eyes locking with the judge's for a brief second before darting back down. I have heard the prosecution, the judge continued slowly, his tone measured, deliberate. I have listened to the defense. I have read the testimonies, the statements, the pleas for leniency, and the cries for justice. His gaze moved between the families seated in the gallery and the defense table, his words carrying the weight of finality. This decision is not one I take lightly, but justice is not a popularity contest. Justice does not bow to influence. And in this courtroom, justice must speak louder than power. The gallery shifted uneasily. You could hear faint sniffles from the victim's side, the quiet clicking of a pen somewhere in the back, and the sharp inhale of a reporter bracing for headlines. Judge Subramanian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench, his voice lowering to a cold, commanding calm. For years, you built an empire, Mr. Combs, an empire of music, fame, and wealth. But behind the curtain, there were choices. Choices that hurt people, destroyed lives, and left scars no amount of money can heal. And today, you must face those choices. The weight of his words sank into the room like lead. Diddy's lawyer, Marcus, glanced toward his client, but Diddy didn't move. His jaw clenched tight, his hands trembling ever so slightly on the table.
I've read every letter submitted on your behalf, the judge continued. I've seen the statements from those you've helped, those you've mentored, those whose lives you've touched. But I've also seen the pain. I've seen the fear in the voices of those who came forward, and I cannot ignore that. The room seemed to shrink around them, the walls closing in, every breath drawn shallow and cautious. Understand this, Mr. Combs, Judge Subramanian said, his voice suddenly sharper, louder, making Diddy flinch slightly. Fame does not grant immunity. Wealth does not rewrite the law. And no man, not even you, stands above justice. Gasps rippled through the gallery, some murmuring under their breaths, others simply staring at Diddy in silence. Judge Subramanian leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable, but his words heavy with consequence. The law exists to hold everyone equally accountable. And in this courtroom, Mr. Combs, you are no different than any other man who has stood where you are standing now. Diddy swallowed hard, his eyes glassy, his breathing uneven. Behind him, his mother buried her face into her hands, her muffled sobs cutting through the oppressive silence. The judge set down his notes carefully, folding his hands over them. Before I deliver this court's decision, he said, his tone low but powerful, you need to understand the gravity of what's about to happen. Once these words leave my mouth, there will be no undoing them. There will be no rewinding this moment. Whatever I say next will define the rest of your life. The tension was unbearable now. People leaned forward instinctively, breaths held, hearts pounding in unison. Diddy's entire body trembled faintly, his lips moving silently as if whispering a prayer. Judge Subramanian looked directly into his eyes. Mr. Combs, he said slowly, please stand and face the court. The sound of Diddy's chair scraping against the polished floor echoed like thunder. His legs felt weak beneath him, but he stood anyway, head bowed, hands clasped tightly together, as though he were holding on to the last thread of hope. Everyone in the room knew the moment of truth was seconds away. Diddy rose slowly from his seat, his legs trembling as though the weight of his entire past was pressing down on him. The courtroom was silent, but the silence wasn't empty. It was suffocating, charged with anticipation, judgment, and fear. He stood there for a moment, gripping the edge of the defense table to steady himself, his knuckles pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked, raw and unsteady. Your Honor, he paused, swallowing hard as though the words were stuck in his throat. I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt people. I know that there are things I can't take back, no matter how much I wish I could. His voice wavered, and for a second, it seemed like he might collapse under the weight of it all. Judge Subramanian's expression didn't change. He sat motionless, his piercing eyes fixed on Diddy, giving away nothing. Diddy turned slightly, glancing at the families in the gallery, the victims whose pain had led them all here. His lips trembled as he tried to form the words, to everyone I've hurt, I am sorry. I've been sorry every single day, and I know my words can't erase the pain. But I need you to know, I hear you, I see you, and I will carry that with me for the rest of my life. Several people in the gallery lowered their heads, some shaking silently, others staring back with cold, unblinking eyes. A woman clutched a photo in her hand so tightly it crumbled, her tears falling onto the frame. Diddy turned back to face the judge, his breathing uneven now, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Your Honor, I've spent my life building an empire, creating opportunities, giving back where I could, but somewhere along the way I lost myself. I let my ego, my fame, my power blind me, And I stand here today, stripped of all of that. He paused, closing his eyes for a moment before whispering almost to himself, I am just a man now. The room remained frozen. Every breath, every movement, every heartbeat seemed louder than words. Diddy's lawyer Marcus placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, whispering something for reassurance, but Diddy didn't respond. His focus was locked on the bench. I'm not asking to walk away free, Diddy continued, his voice gaining strength as desperation took over. I'm not asking for my past to be erased. All I'm asking for is a chance to prove that I can be better, a chance to fix whatever pieces I still can before it's too late. He hesitated, his voice breaking again as he whispered almost to himself, I have kids, Your Honor. I have people who look up to me, people who still believe in me. His eyes glistened under the courtroom lights as he tried to compose himself, but the tears kept spilling down his cheeks. Please don't take away the rest of my life without giving me the chance to show them, to show you that I can change. The gallery was still silent, but you could feel the emotions crashing beneath the surface. Reporters scribbled furiously, trying to capture every word, every trembling pause. Diddy's breathing turned shallow now, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Each word heavy, deliberate. This moment, this day, it's already taken everything